Welcome everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how you can create this sign-in flow that you see here. So this is made with my new package, Lit Firebase Auth, and the logic to do the authentication is super simple. The most complex thing in this video is the actual UI. So that is the purpose of this video, to show you how you can make a more complex user interface using the Lit Firebase Auth package. But not only that, this video will be extended on the Amateur Coder YouTube channel, as this was made in collaboration with Tadas. He will take the UI that we have here and also add third-party authentication. So he'll show you how easy it is to add Google, Apple and Twitter authentication. And if you want, you can also extend it yourself and add GitHub authentication, as all of this is very easy to do with the Lit Firebase Auth package. So a big shout out to Tadas and the Amateur Coder YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out the channel, you're missing out. And a thanks to him for reaching out to make a collaboration in this video. As I said, in this video we will focus on making this custom sign-in form fully working and integrated with Firebase. And as this is a very long video, I've broken it down into multiple sections. You can also find the breakdowns for the different sections in the timeline below. We will be discussing a lot: how to use a custom painter, how to use the animations package with custom transitions, general animation concepts, as well as some base practices regarding performance. And then obviously also how to use the Lit Firebase Auth package to do authentication in your app. If you struggle with some of the concepts in this video, or if at certain points I go too fast, then I recommend checking out my animation course. I've made an entire course discussing all of the core principles of animation, as well as going in depth in performance optimization. With that said, let's jump into the video. Okay, so let's jump into the code. I've made this starter project just to spare some time in me typing everything out. And what we currently have is these two folders, so a config folder and a screens folder. And for now we just have the auth screen, and this is in a folder as well because later on we will be adding additional widgets to this. Then we have an empty background painter file. So this will be where we put our class that does the custom painting. So that will be where we do the background effect. And then we have our main.dart file, which is just a material app with a scaffold. And in the scaffold, or in the body, we are just returning an auth screen. And then in the auth screen, we have the stack. The first widget in the stack is just a container wrapped in a sizebox.expand. And then finally, we also have this config folder with a palette class and just a couple of static variables for the different colors that we will use in the application. So going back to the auth screen, we can remove this container, and instead of it being a container, we will create a custom paint. And we won't pass in any child. If we do give it a child, then the custom paint will be as big as the child. And if there's no child, then it will be as big as it possibly can be. And that is why we're using this sizebox.expand. So we're expanding all of the available real estate or screen size that we have available in the stack. So what we need to pass in is a custom painter. And we do that by passing in the painter attribute. And this is where we will actually need to create our own custom painter. So if we open the background painter file, we will create a new class and we will call this background painter. And it will extend a custom painter. And for the custom painter, we will need to import rendering.dart. The painting happens quite low level. We aren't creating a new widget or anything. So it's not necessary for us to import material.dart. As for now, all we need access to is the painting library. And to use a custom painter, we will need to override these two methods, the paint method and the should repaint. And the should repaint is just an optimization method that I'm not going to get into in this video, but it essentially just tells the painter whether the paint should be called or not. So every time the background painter gets an update, the should repaint determines whether the paint method will be called again. However, later on we will be making use of an animation, and that animation will drive the paint to be updated. So for now we don't actually need to be too concerned about this, and we can just return true and say that we always want to do a repaint. So let's do a quick example. You can see that in the method we get access to a canvas and a size, and the canvas is where we do the actual painting, and the size is that it is the size of the canvas, or the available size that we have to paint in. If we were to print the size, it will be the size of this emulator. Okay, so to begin the painting, we will say canvas.drawPaint, and this literally does that. We just need to give it a paint object, and then it will fill the canvas with that paint. So we will just give a color that is equal to our palette.darkblue. So this dark blue is from the palette file over here. So if we save this, and then in auth.dart, we will now say that this should be the background painter. And there you go. Now it is a different color, and we're doing painting with this custom painter class. So we can also say the dark orange, and yeah, you get the idea. You will also note that we are printing that the size is equal to this over here, which is actually this screen emulator except for this material app bar. So it's all of the available size below the app bar. So let's take this out, and then we will actually now just say print, and I'm just going to say painting. I want to keep this for now, just so that we actually see when the painting method gets called, because later on we will do some slight optimizations. And one thing to note in this call over here is that we are now creating a new paint object every time the paint method is called. So this will be inefficient if we're doing animation where the paint method will be called a lot. So instead of creating the object over here, we can instead create it in the constructor list. So I'm going to create a background painter constructor, and then below this we will create a blue paint. So this will be final paint blue paint, and then in the constructor list we will say blue paint equals paint, and the color will be equal to the palette dot light blue, and then we can just say semicolon. Something else that we can specify in the paint is the style, and the style will be equal to painting style dot fill. So we have two, we have stroke and fill. Fill will fill the area, and stroke will instead create a stroke along whatever path we were to specify. So stroke, for example, would be like if you wanted to paint a line, but we want to paint a fill. So I'm just going to proceed and copy in the other paints that we will need. So now we have a blue paint, a gray paint, and the orange paint. And next up, let's start painting the actual shapes. So I'm going to show you how to do the blue shape, or that blue liquid one. So to begin, let's create a new method over here, and we will call this paint blue. And this will require the canvas and size. And then instead of doing this here, I'm just going to call this paint blue method. And the reason I'm separating this is because it is going to get it is going to become a lot of code. So it's just going to be cleaner to have these in separate methods when we paint the different blobs or the different liquid effects. And to get those custom effects, we will make use of something that's called a path. So we will create a new path object, and a path you can see as like a line that you're drawing. So it's the path that the paint should follow, or it's the path that you specify where the painting should happen. Let me show you by example. So we will say path.move_to. So this initial move to will put the path at a starting location somewhere on our screen or somewhere on our canvas. And our canvas has a size of the entire screen, because if you remember in auth.dart, we have wrapped our custom painter in the size box.expand. We have the entire screen size to work with. So as an example, let's move this to the size.width. So basically move it to here, and then we will say size.height divided by 2. And I just realized that we still have this title bar over here, or this app bar. So I'm just going to remove this. Okay, and then next what we want to do is we want to draw a line. So we will say path.line2 and then size.width and 0. So this will draw a line from here to the top of the screen. And then we will draw a line to 0, 0. And then for now, I'm just going to say path.close just so we can actually do a demonstration. So now we actually want to draw that path. So I'm going to say canvas.draw path. Sorry, not paint, draw path. We given the path, and let's give the blue paint. And there we go. Now we have this shape over here. So now we want to start creating a little bit of a curve shape to this. And to do that, we will make use of something called a bezier curve. So at the bottom over here, I'm just going to paste in this method. So what this method will do is we will pass in a path, and then we will add a number of points to that path. And these points are just XY coordinates. So at the bottom over here, I'm just going to create that point class. So you can see that's literally just an X and a Y that is of type double. And if we go through the code, you can see that we have some condition over here that says we need to pass in more than 3 points, or at least we can create a smooth bezier curve that connects multiple points. There are a lot of resources online explaining what a bezier curve is, and I go into great detail discussing bezier curves and custom painting and animation in the Mastering Animation course. So if you want to learn more about all of this, I recommend checking out the course. But with that said, it might actually be easier for me to demonstrate a bezier curve on its own before we take a look at exactly what this class is doing. So currently we are just going from line or from point 0, 0, and then we're closing the line to the starting point. So instead of doing this, let's take that out and let's add a quadratic bezier curve to the path. And for that, we will need to give it a control point and then a endpoint. So the endpoint will be x2 and y2. So this will be essentially where we started. So I'm going to say size.width and size.height divided by 2. This is where we want to end. And now, as an example, let's give size.width divided by 2. And I think if we say size.width divided by .height divided by 4, I think there should be a straight line. So let's refresh. Okay, perfect. So it's a straight line because the control point, so the point that basically determines how the bench should look, is directly on this straight line over here. If we were to remove the control point from this straight line, for example, put it at point 0, then you can see we start getting this curve over here. If you've ever used a drawing tool or a vector tool, all of those programs just make use of bezier curves to draw these smooth shapes. And what we essentially want is to connect multiple of these bezier curves together. For example, now we have this one curve, but how do we connect this curve to another curve to another curve? And that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, or at least from a mathematical perspective. And that is what this method tries to do. It just tries to abstract the logic so that we don't have to write all of this every single time. And all we need to do is pass in a series of points. So for example, a point here, a point there, a point there, and then it will try and create a smooth curve on the path. And it does that by calculating the control point, by looking at the current point plus the next points on the line, and then dividing it by 2. So technically, this won't go through the points. For example, if I specify a point to be right over here, the line won't go through it, but it will go close to it. There are ways you can make a bezier curve or a smooth curve like this that go through specified points, but it's a bit more complicated, and for our example, this is perfect. And yeah, the same is happening for the Y position, and then we are just creating a quadratic bezier curve. Here we are actually using the points that we pass in as the control point. Feel free to copy this method as is, and I will also link to resources that explain the mathematics in more detail. But then finally at the end, we just want to connect the last 2 points, because this for loop over here goes to our points.length minus 2. So the last 2 points in the lists, those we just want to connect manually. So as an example, we will remove this quadratic bezier curve, and we will call the add points to path function. We will give in the path, and then we just need to give the list of points. So the first point will also be at 0, 0, and the reason for that is because we want to maintain this position, but later on we want to animate this 0, 0 from the top to the bottom, while still maintaining this line or this point over here. Later on this will become a little bit clearer. So let's add the other points. Okay, so now we have 3 points, 0, 0, and then size.width in the middle and size.height in the middle divided by 2, and then the full width over here and size.height divided by 2. So this is basically the final point. So this is going back to where we started over here in the beginning. So if we save, you can see we get this cool little curve over here. And if we wanted to, we can just add in extra points. So if we want to be random and throw in a point at the end over here, maybe size.height divided by 4 as an example, you can see now we get smooth curves that connect together. But yeah, we don't want this one. So next up, what we want to do is we want to animate this. So we want to create the logic that will drive the animation to go from this state over here to the bottom where it just falls and makes a little bit of a splash. And for that, we will need to make use of animations. So in our off screen, we will actually convert this now to a stateful widget. And here we will make use of an animation and an animation controller. So we'll create a new animation controller, call this controller, and then in the init state, we will initialize the controller. And an animation controller requires a vsync. And what the vsync will do is it will tie the animation controller to listen to new frames that are being rendered. So every time the frame is updated, the vsync will trigger an update. In this class, we will just extend with a single ticket provider state mixin, and this will allow us to pass in a vsync of this. So we just pass in this class, and then we can also specify a duration for our animation, and the duration we will set to be 2 seconds. And that is all we need for now. Now we just need to pass in this controller or this animation controller to our custom painter. So in the background painter, we want to pass in the animation. So over here, I'm going to say animation of type double, and we'll call this animation. And for this, we will actually need to import the animation library. And at the bottom, after we create all of this, we want to call super as well. And here we want to pass in a repaint, and this is the animation. So if we take a look at the custom painter class, you can see it extends listenable, and that in the constructor we can pass in a listenable of repaint. So the painter will repaint whenever repaint notifies its listeners. Essentially every time the listener changes, so this repaint changes, then it will trigger the paint method to be called, which is exactly what we want. We want our animation to drive the painting so that we can actually do an update every time the animation changes. So if we go back to off, and over here I'm just going to pass in the animation, and then we can say controller.value, and it shouldn't be controller.value, it should be controller.view. So yeah, the controller.view is just the animation double of the controller or the animation controller, because by default the animation controller is just a value from 0 to 1, and that is exactly what we want in this instance. So now that we have this animation, we also want to create our own custom animation objects that have different curves, so different ways of responding to the animation change. So that is how we will achieve the effects. So just above all of these, I'm going to create a couple of the additional animation objects. So the liquid animation will be the liquid effect, so the lines that are moving, and the blue animation will be the position for all of the blue paint. And then the same for the gray and the orange, and the gray paint and the orange paint. However, for now, we'll just focus on the blue animation. So at the bottom or below orange paint, we're just going to initialize all of these. So you can see that as an example, if we look at the blue animation is a curved animation, and we specify a curve. Curve is when the animation goes from 0 to 1, and the reverse curve is the opposite, when the animation goes from 0 to 1, so when the animation is in reverse. And then you can see here that we have this thing called, or this class called Spring Curve. And this is a custom class that I made, or a custom curve that I made, and I have an entire video explaining exactly how to do this and how to make your own custom curves. So the link for that is on the top right if you are interested. But it's very easy to make your own custom curve. All this does is it just makes a little bit of a spring effect. So for this we will actually just need to import dart.math, and the same for that intervals that we saw. So over here you can see that we have this interval in the gray animation and in the orange animation. And what the interval allows you to do is it essentially says that we will drive this animation only for the interval from 0 to 0.7 for the parent animation. So this will allow the orange animation and this gray animation to end slightly sooner than the blue animation that does not make use of this interval. The terminology for this is called staggered animations, and again I have a number of videos discussing this on the channel. But for now all we care about is this blue animation. Fairly straightforward. We pass in the parent, and this is the animation we get over here. So this will drive this blue animation, and then we have a normal curve and a reverse curve. The curve that I chose for the reverse curve is this ease in circ, and the reason for that is just because I thought it looked nice. One thing to note as well is that we will need to use the liquid animation. So the liquid animation makes use of an elastic out curve and an ease in back curve. And this is where the magic will start to happen. Because what we want to do is we want to change all of these points and all of these path positions as the animation is driven forward. So let's reformat this, and what we will do is we will use a method called loop double. So this will interpolate from a beginning value, value A, to value B over a time t, and this time t will be driven by the animation. So as an example, we will start off at 0, so what we had, but now we will end at size.height, and this will be driven by the blue animation dot value. So if we just save this and don't do anything else, and now in our off screen, if we actually start the animation, so to start the animation, we're just going to create this little bit of a demo button or something. So I'm just going to create a raised button, and then in the on pressed, we will just call controller.forward, and we will actually say from 0. So this means that the controller, every time we press the button, it starts again from 0 or from time 0. And then child and text, we'll call it animate, and let's just center the button. So now if we press animate, you can see that we get a filling effect over there. So it's animating just this little bit because of the loop double, because it's taking the animation value and then interpolating from 0 to the size.height. However, I just realized that this is technically wrong. We want the width to be at 0 and the height to be at the bottom. So now if we press it, this is closer to the effect that we want. But what we actually want is we want to create another path with another line too, and over here is where we will be making use of these particular values. So I'm just going to save that, and in this one we want to change it slightly. We're going to create a loop double from 0 to size.width divided by 3, and again we will use the blue animation.value. And now if we press animate, we get this effect over here. I'm just gonna replace this with the final version. So next up, what we want to do is we want to interpolate from size.width divided by 2 to this particular one, and this time instead of using the blue animation, we want to use this liquid animation. And if we save this and take a look, you can see it's slightly different. So now the points to the path where it goes from here to this one, it uses a slightly different animation. If we were to make this the blue anim as well, then you will see that it's a very rigid animation, like everything follows the same pattern. If you make a slight alteration in the animations that you use, then you can see it's a little bit different. This will become more evident once I add the extra point. So instead of making this point fixed, let's animate that point as well. And there we go. Now we have that animation. So I'm just going to speed up and add the other points as well, or add the other colors. So I added two new methods, the paint gray and the paint orange, and they do something very similar, obviously just with different points. And then at the bottom here, on the bottom in the paint method, we will call paint gray, and then we will call paint orange. And the blue will be painted first, gray will be painted on that, and then orange will be painted on top of that. And if everything works, then yeah, we should get our animation. So feel free to take a look at these methods if you want to see exactly how I did it. The only other thing that is still left to do is to reverse the animation, to go back from this point to the initial point. So that's the difference between the login screen and the sign up screen. And we will do that once we get to that particular part in the UI. An important step that I forgot earlier was in the auth screen where we create our animation controller. We always need to remember to dispose of a controller. So in the dispose method, we will just call controller.dispose to avoid any potential memory leaks. And another thing is that in the auth screen, we are returning a scaffold, which makes sense because it's a new screen. But in the main .dart file, we have an additional scaffold, which is not necessary. So I'm just gonna remove this, and we will just pass in the auth screen as the home attribute. And this should still be exactly the same. Now with the painting out of the way, we can start doing the UI. And for that, this is where the package comes in, so Lit Firebase Auth. So in our pubsec.yaml file, we will import the Lit Firebase Auth package. And instead of me just typing it out, I'm just going to make use of a plugin, so the pubsec assist plugin, to just add it. So I'm just going to search for the lit package, and then here we have Lit Firebase Auth, and at the time of recording, this is the latest version. So let's hit save on that. And the first thing you need to do to use this package is at the root of your application, you need to supply the lit auth init widget. So this will initialize the plugin and expose all of these services and everything else that we will use for authentication in the app. Then we will head on over to the auth screen, and let's just restart the application. And I stopped the application because now we got an error saying that we have error launching application on iPhone 11 or error running the pod install. And that is because we will need to up the version of iOS. So in the iOS folder, you shouldn't get this issue on Android. However, there are other configurations that you will need to do. I recommend going on pub.dev for all of the configurations that you will need for the different platforms. For iOS, all we need to do is just ensure that, I believe it's from version 8 or higher, or maybe from 9, I'm not too sure, but we will just set the platform version to be iOS 9. And now if we run the application again, it should work fine. And I lied, if you run it again, you will get the configuring the default Firebase app, and it might actually loop in that for a little bit or for a long time. And that is because we need to provide the Google Services file for iOS. So if you go to the Firebase console, you can see that we can configure different applications. So what we want to configure is the iOS app. And I've already proceeded to do that. And there are good guides online to help you with this process. And Firebase actually tells you exactly what to do when you create a new application as well. And part of the final step is to download the Google Services info plist, and then you will need to add that to your application, or you will need to add that to the iOS runner folder. And to add the info.plist file, we will need to make use of Xcode. On Android, this is much easier. You can actually just drag the info.plist file into the appropriate Android directory. Again, there are guides for this. I will just be demoing how to do it on iOS. So what we want to do is in the iOS directory for our Flutter project, we want to open the runner Xcode project. So I'm just going to open that. And then what we want to do is we want to drag in our Google info.plist file and just put it in the runner directory, and then just say finish. And that should work. So I'm just going to minimize this. And now if we run it, hopefully there won't be any issues. Okay, so the app is running again. Now we want to start building out our UI screen. So in the off screen within the scaffold, so above this stack, we are going to wrap this in a new widget. And this will be the lit off widget. And we will say .custom. And I'm not too sure why this is not importing by default, but there we go. And what the custom constructor does, it allows us to basically build our own completely custom authentication widget. By default, you can just use the lit off widget, and I can actually just quickly show you. So instead of returning all of this, let's return a new scaffold, and the body, we will say lit off. So just the pure lit off widget. If we run this, you can see here we have a sign-in form. And without doing anything else, this is fully functional and working with Firebase Auth. So this is an account that I've already created, and you can see we get the pop-up that says signed in. Later on, I will show you how we can do navigation and the other widgets that are provided in the package to make all of this even more easy. So yeah, that's why we want to make use of the lit off custom, because we want to modify this entirely. So in the bottom of the stack, we are just going to remove this, and we will now make a new widget called sign in. So we are going to make a widget for sign in, and we're going to make a different widget for register. By default, the app just allows you to sign in with a button or register with a button, but we want to have two separate pages essentially. Let's comment this for now. And then in the auth folder over here, we're going to create a new file, and we will call this signin.dart. And this will be a stateless widget called sign in. And then we can just import material. And then we will return a sign in form. So this is a normal form that you have in Flutter, except it's also wrapped in some additional logic to display notification messages, also respond to error messages. So for example, if the password is incorrect, so the email is incorrect, you get a notification that says this is not a valid email. And the same for the password if it's too small or too short. So yeah, in this sign-in form, we will create a child, and we'll create a column and give it children. And yeah, I just need to import the package, the lit off package. And we will have two expanded widgets. So in the first one, we will give this a child of line. And if you're not familiar, expanded just fills all of the remaining space that's available. So if we were to have a column from top to bottom, the expanded will take everything. If there are two expandeds, they will share all of the available space. So it will take half of the screen size, or half of the size available in a column. And the alignment, we will set this to be equal to alignment center left. And what we're creating now is the title. I'm going to create a new widget called login title. And sorry if you can hear rain outside, it just started to rain. So you may be able to hear that in the recording. And the reason I'm creating a new login title here is because we will be using this in the other, or in the registration page as well. So let's create a new file, and we will call this just the title.dart. And I'm just going to copy this in. This is just a text widget that is styled in a certain way with a white color and a size of 34 and this font weight. And we just pass in the title. So back in sign in, we will just import that and we will set the title to be welcome back. And we actually need to specify this as the title. And now if we go back to our off screen here, we will uncomment this and we'll just import that class. And this is working now. You might not be able to see it in the video. The title is there, but because it's white, we cannot see it. So what we want to do now is in the other expanded widget, we will create a list view. And this list view will contain all of the text fields and the buttons. And the reason we want this to be a list view is because when the keyboard goes up, we still want this to be scrollable. We don't want to get any overflowing errors. So we will give this a list of children, and we will begin by giving it a padding, and it will be a vertical padding of 16, and the first child will be the email text form field. So now if we save this, you can see that we get the email field over here, or this text form field, and in a similar way we can create the password one. But before we do that, I will just like to wrap all of this in a padding. So we're just going to say padding, and we will set this to be 32, and that looks a little bit better. Next up, we would like to decorate this slightly. So we can pass in a decoration. So this is a normal input decoration that you would use with a normal text input field. So we can create a new input decoration, and there are a ton of different things that we can modify. But as this is something that we will be reusing in different parts of the application, it makes more sense to abstract this to a function. So I'm actually just going to copy in a file, or paste in a file, and this is the decoration functions. So we have a register input decoration and a sign in input decoration, and all this does is just decorates the text form field. Let's just fix all of these errors. So we'll just need to import our palette, and there we go. And then now back in the sign in, we will just call in the sign in input decoration. And if we save this, we get the following input decoration. And just to give you a quick idea what we're doing, the method over here, we are giving it a content padding. We have a hint style with just normal text, and then we have different types of borders depending on whether it's focused, if it's an error, if it's enabled. So yeah, depending on the different states, the border slightly changes. So perfect. Let's go back to the code. So now we will create another one of these. However, this time, instead of an email text form field, this will be the password text form field. And yeah, fantastic. Now we have a password field over here. Next up, we want to create the sign up bar at the bottom. So this will be the area where we say sign in and where we provide a button. So I'm just going to create a new widget called sign in bar. And for this, we will create a new file, and I'm going to call this sign in and underscore up bar, because we will be using this for signing in and up, not the base name. So we'll create a stateless widget and call this sign up bar, and then just import material dot. And we will pass in 3 parameters to initialize these variables. So let's just say add final parameters, and then we will mark all of these as required. So in the build, I'm just going to paste the final code and walk you through it. We have a padding and then a row, and the first child in the row is just a text field that is equal to the label, so the label that we pass in. And then we have our expanded, or we expand the available size and have this loading indicator that we will create. And then we also need to create this around continue button. I'm gonna paste in those widgets. So the first one is the loading indicator, and here we have a constraint box. So we are essentially saying that the maximum width of the loading indicator is 100. And then we have this visibility. So based on a boolean that we pass in, so this is loading, If this is true, then the widget will be visible. So this linear progress indicator would be visible. If it's false, then it will not be visible. So yeah, then we also need to import our colors or our palette. And then we have this round continue button. Let me actually show you exactly what the round continue button will look like by just fixing all of these errors, and then we can proceed to talk about the code. So you can see that I'm making use of the font awesome icons. So for that, we will need to add that package. So I'm just going to say font awesome, and yeah, font awesome Flutter. And once Flutter pub is finished, we should be able to import this. And fantastic. Okay, so now we don't have any errors in this class, and I'll get back to it in a moment. So now we just need to import the sign-in bar, and this is because I named this sign up bar. We actually want this to be the sign-in bar. We're going to create a separate one for the sign up screen, and now we can import that. And now we need to specify the is loading. So for now, let's just say true. And the label will be sign in, and the on pressed will just be empty for now. And there you go. Now we have this loading indicator that's always showing. We have a text here that says sign in, and then this button, and we're not rendering the icon. And the reason we're not rendering the icon is probably because we need to do a hot restart, or potentially even restart the application, because we are using font awesome. Okay, so the application has restarted, and now we have the icon that we want. So just to explain this in more detail, if we take a look at the rounded continue button, all this is a raw material button. We pass in the on press, and the on press has a void callback. So basically, when we press the button, we will just call the on pressed. We should probably do a test here to make sure it's not null, but we're just going to skip that. And then, yeah, we have a full color and a splash color, and then our actual icon, and the shape is a circle border. So that's how we get this rounded shape. And for the loading indicator, we did discuss that. So now that we have all of this, there are a couple of things that I want to do globally for the application. And that is by supplying a new theme. So I'm just gonna I'm just gonna provide the theme attribute and paste in this theme data. So you can see that we set the text theme to make use of the Google Fonts package, and we will make use of the Muli font. And if you haven't used the Google Fonts package, this is fantastic. It's just a super simple way in Flutter to make use of any of the fonts that are available by Google. So we'd actually need to add that package. So I'm just going to add that package, and let's search for Google Fonts. And now we can import that, and we will need to import our palette file. And now let's do a hot restart again. And this will probably mean that we will need to do another restart of the application for the plugin to work, just to get everything working for the Google Fonts package. Okay, so the app has started again, and now we're making use of the Muli text theme. And yeah, just to illustrate, if we want to use a different one, so whatever this one is, the bezier text theme, if we save, it should change the theme globally. And I'm not sure if it did. Let's do a weird one. Maybe actor, I don't know, Dima text theme. And yeah, if we do a hot restart or restart here, then you can see the theme or the text theme changes. So yeah, let's go back to what we had with the Muli text theme. And then we also have this accent color dark orange, and we specify an app bar theme, and we give the brightness to dark and a color of dark blue. This is technically not necessary, but setting the brightness to dark will make this over here light, or it should be. We will get back to this later on. So if we proceed back to the off screen and actually go to the sign in widget. So something that I forgot is in the sign in input decoration, we also need to pass in the hint text. So for the email, we will say this is email, and same for the password. we will just supply the hint text. And then another thing we want to do is I just want to better expand or put these at better locations. So in this expanded widget over here, in the title expanded, we will give it a new flex. So we will set the flex to be equal to 3. And now this takes up more space than the email and password widget does over here, because the flex is more than the flex that we provide over here. So in this one, we will set the flex to be 4. So essentially this will take 3 out of 7 for the available size. And this one will take 4 out of 7 of the available size, if 7 was the actual size of the column. And there we go. We have the sign-in screen ready. And now what we still need to do is to actually drive the logic. Because currently if we press this button, it will do nothing. So where we call the sign-in bar, what we want to do is we need to determine when the application is actually loading, and we need to supply the method that will actually trigger an authentication. So with lit auth, what you need to do is you need to call context, or using the context at least, you get access to a number of different methods. So for example, sign in anonymously, sign in with Apple, sign in with credentials, and this one will be sign in with email and password. So just calling this and making sure that we are within a child widget of sign in form and a child widget of the actual lit auth custom widget, then that will work without problem. So if we scroll down to the bottom, you can see that in the on press we now have that. So now if we press enter or click the button, you can see that we get a warning that says this is an invalid email. So I'm just going to say test.test, and I'm actually not going to sign in now. I'm just going to insert gibberish, and you can see invalid email and password combination. So great. So now we also need to know when is the authentication actually occurring. So at the top here, I'm just going to create a final is submitting variable, and we will say context.isSubmitting, and this will basically be called or updated every time the is submitting changes. So every time we actually are submitting, then the build method will be re-triggered, and this is submitting will change. So yeah, then in the sign in bar over here, we will just pass in the is submitting value. And now if we press this, you can see that it loads, but only for the duration until it actually does the authentication, or at least until authentication fails in this instance. If we wanted to optimize this slightly, then we don't actually need to pass in all of this. So we don't need to do the context.sign in with email over here. For example, in the actual sign in bar, where we do the rounded continue button press, it would also make perfect sense to just say context.sign in here. But then we'd also need to remember to import the lit auth package. The reason we might want to do this is so that we don't rebuild anything unnecessarily. But for now, I'm just going to keep this as is. It would definitely make sense to do it in the loading indicator. So over here, we can do the final is submitting, and then context that is submitting again. But again, we need to import lit auth, and it's not importing automatically because of the fact that this is an extension method. But back to the point I was trying to make is that in this loading indicator, if we were to get the is submitting over here, that would result in only the constraint box being called. It won't result in this it will result in this entire build method being triggered. And as opposed to what we're currently doing, when the is submitting is fired, then this entire build method will be called again. But we can avoid that by creating constants where we can. We can create a constant over here, but in certain places we can create or make use of constant values. But that is that for this part. So we have the sign-in screen ready. Next, we will create the logic that drives the animation to go to the registration page. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to add a new file, and this will be register.dart. And this is very, very similar to the sign-in page. And in some ways, I could have abstracted the logic a bit more, but sometimes it's better to write something twice and not to over abstract. And as this is only 2 places that I'm writing the same code twice, I'm not too concerned about it. But yeah, if you explore this class, you will note that in a lot of ways it's very similar to the sign-in page. The only difference is that we have a different title when we create this login title widget, and that we also obviously now have the sign up bar that we haven't created. So if we go to the sign in up bar file, we have the sign in bar. So now we need to add the sign up bar. And I'm just gonna copy this in. So this is very, very similar to the one we have below. There's only a UI difference. So it's only a different color. So let's just save this. And now in the auth page, we are gonna create a value listenable or a value notifier. And this will be of type bool. And we will call this show sign in page. And we will set the default value to be equal to true, and just fix the spelling. And then at the bottom over here, where we have the sign in page, we will wrap this in a value listenable builder. And this will be of type bool. And let's remove the child. And we'll create a builder. And the builder gets a context and then a value and then a child. So the child would be if we were to create a child attribute here, and the value will be the value of the listenable. So we're going to create a value listenable, and this will be the show sign in page. So this variable that we created at the top here. So now every time that value value notifier changes, the listenable builder will be called, and all of the child widgets will be updated. So we will just return a little bit of a logic check. So if the value is true, we will return the sign in widget. Otherwise, we will return the register widget. And this, we will just need to import that class. So if we save this, then we should still see everything as the same. And then now we need a way to change this, the sign in page. And yeah, I just realized that this is actually spelled wrong. Let's just rename this. Not sig, but sign. So as I said, we need to have a way to actually change the value. So from true to false and false to true. So in the sign-in page or the sign-in widget, we will create a final void callback, and we'll call this on register clicked. And then let's just pass this in, and I'm actually going to say that this is required. So this callback will be the callback that changes the state from is the sign-in page showing or is the register page showing. And at the bottom, so below the sign-in bar, I'm just going to paste in this line over here. And what this does, it creates this inkwell with a child of text that says sign up. And then you can see that now if we press this sign up over here, then we will call the register clicked. And what this does, this equal sign of this question mark, is we check to see if this is null. And if it's not null, then we will call the method. So this is the equivalent of saying if on register clicked is not equal to null, then on register clicked call. So yeah, this is the same as this, just a lot easier to read. So back in auth.dart, now we will pass in the onRegisterClicked function, and what we want to do is say show sign in page dot value equals false. So we don't want to show the sign in page, we want to show the registration page. So if everything worked, then it works. So and we are currently not seeing anything else on the screen because those widgets are white, or those input forms are white. And we need to drive our animation, so this background animation, to go to the bottom. So to do that, we will just say controller.forward. And let's do a restart. And now if we go to the sign page, Perfect. We have our animation and we load the registration page. Now we just need to also go back. So go back from the registration page back to the sign-in page. And to do that in the register, we also need to provide this onSignedInPressed method. So if you remember, I copied this class in earlier, and this is exactly the same as the sign-in page, just slight UI differences. So let's pass in the onSignedInPressed, and this will look very similar. The only difference now is that we will say this is true. So we show the sign-in page, and then we will say reverse instead of forward. And if we press sign in now, it reverses the animation with a slightly different look, and we go back to the sign-in page. So perfect. One thing to note now is that let's say I enter test.com and just gibberish and press this over here, we get an invalid email combination as we'd expect. But now if we go to the sign up page, then we can now enter, for example, another test here, create an account. This will say that this account is already in use. And now if we go back to the sign-in page and just press without doing anything, you can see that it's saying that we get an invalid email and password combination. And this is not expected because this input field is empty. But technically the state hasn't been changed. And that is because this entire state class hasn't been removed. But the Flutter has not kept track of what it should show on the UI side. So two options here. You can either not clear this field, just save it in some way. Or instead of doing that, in the show sign-in page, you can just say context.reset sign-in form. And what this will do is just basically flush the state for the sign-in form. So just make sure that it doesn't have anything left in memory. So now we do the same in the registration page as well. So if we were to do the same test again, go to the sign-in page, and then go back to the sign-in page and hit enter, then we get the expected invalid email password too short. So just a slight catcher, something that you will need to be aware of if you're using this package. Maybe in the future this will slightly change. Next up, what we want to do is we want to create a slight better transition between the sign-in page and the registration page or widgets. Because currently it's just jumping to the next one. Like there's no visual distinction between this email over here and this email over here. It kind of looks the same. It just looks like the text has changed. It's not clear that this is now the sign up form. Kind of just looked at like some of the UI changed. So to do that, we will do a bit of a transition between this form and the registration form. So we're going to do a couple of changes. First, just to also make this a bit more responsive. For example, if we were to run this on Flutter web or a web application, a couple of things we might want to do is just center this so that we have all of the available space, and then we will create a constrained box, and we will give a constraints, and this will be box constraints, and max width 800. And now we're just basically saying that the width of our entire sign-in form and registration form can never be bigger than 800. So now if we were to run this on an iPad as an example, it will still maintain a nice looking feel. Like the email won't be stretched all the way across the screen. You can run this on Flutter Web and see how it looks like for yourself. Okay, so to continue what I said, we want to create a bit of a transition. So I'm just going to comment this out for now. So we will return a page transition switcher. And this is something that we will need an additional package for. And this is available from the animation package. And this is a package that's developed by the Flutter team. So it's a series of very convenient and nice transition widgets that you can use in your application. So these follow the new motion design spec that is released by Google. And what the page transition widget switcher does, it essentially simulates a transition occurring between two widgets. It's very similar to the animated switcher, if you're familiar with that, which does an animation and switches between two different child widgets. But what is nice about the page transition switcher, as we will see in a moment, is the fact that we can give an animation and we can give a reverse animation. So let's just import this package, and then as the first parameter, we will give a duration, and we will set the duration to be milliseconds of 800. And then we'll create a transition builder, and this gets a child, an animation, and a secondary animation. And then here we will return a shared access transition. And there are a number of different transitions available in this package. I highly encourage you to take a look at the animations package. But yeah, now we will need to give an animation, and here we will make use of this animation that's provided by this transition builder, and the reverse animation, it's actually called secondary animation. We will set that to be the secondary animation, and we will set the transition type to be shared access transition type, and we will set it to be vertical. And then here we will pass in the child, and this child that we get is in the page transition. So we can create a child attribute, and this will be what we had before. So let's just copy this in, and I'm just going to remove this, and let's just do a hot restart. And now you can see that our painting has vanished, and the reason for that is because this page transition widget and the shared access transition will actually have a default full color applied to it. So basically its own background color. So we just need to specify that the full color will be transparent. And there you go. Now you can see what is behind this transition widget. So yeah, just to quickly explain what is happening, in the page transition switcher, this page transition switcher will basically call the builder every time the child changes. So when this sign in changes its value, then, for example, when the actual widget type changes, so when it goes from a sign in widget to a register widget, then this will cause Flutter to trigger the page transition switcher, which will call the builder, and this builder will do this shared access transition, which will give us the nice animation effect that we want. So hopefully everything works. If we press sign up now, you can see that it animated in from the bottom, and now it animated again from the bottom. So you can see it does like there's a little bit of an effect. So it's a bit more visually pleasing, and it's clear that something is happening. But what is a bit annoying to me now is the fact that it goes from the bottom to the top. So in the page transition switcher, we can actually specify this reverse value, and we will say that this is the opposite of the value that we get from the value listenable builder. So when this essentially goes down, then we want this to go up. So now if we do the animation, you highlight when this goes down, we want it to go down. So now when we do the animation back, it goes up, and if we go to the sign up page, it goes down. So it just follows it a little bit better. Just to be extra clear when it comes to this, as an example, if we were to pass in the same widget, so if we were to go from the sign in widget to the sign in widget, then it actually won't do the transition. And the reason for that is because Flutter sees this as exactly the same widget, and it's not the same widget, but because it is the same type. So how we can get past that is by specifying a key. So we can specify a value key, and we can say sign in 1 and sign in 2. And now if we do a hot restart, you can see it does the actual transition. So just to illustrate that again, you can see the transition is working. But yeah, that's not what we want. We want this to be the register widget. But just for clarity, I am going to add those keys. The first one we will call sign in, and the second register. Okay, we are getting closer to finishing this entire application. What we will do next is the logic to go from the auth page to the home page. So for that, in the screens folder over here, I'm just going to paste in another file called home. So this is the home screen, and all this does is show this sign in state, and then we can sign out as well. And I will touch on this in a moment. So let's just comment this out so that we remember to get back to this, and then go back to main.dart, and then we will wrap this auth screen in a widget called lit auth state. And this does not take in a child. Instead, this takes in an unauthenticated attribute, and it also takes in an authenticated attribute. So if we are authenticated, we want to return the home screen, but if we're not authenticated, then we will return the auth screen. So now you can see that we are actually already authenticated, and that is because at some point during this demo, I actually did an authentication, and it still remembered that auth state. So now if we tap the sign out, nothing happens because we commented that out. So if we go to the home page, to do a sign out in the button, all you need to do is say context.signout. And again, this should just be below the actual lit auth init over here. So as long as it's below lit auth init, then this will work without issue. You can call it wherever you are in your application. And by below, I mean below in the widget tree. So now saying sign out, it takes us back to the sign in page. And if we are to sign in, then we will go to the home screen. So perfect. So we are almost at the home stretch. One of the last things we need to do is just make a better transition from the login screen to the home screen. Because currently when we sign in, you can see that it's a very abrupt transition from unauthenticated to the home screen. Normally in mobile apps, there are a transition from one screen to the next one. So at the time of recording, the lit auth state doesn't support transitions, but maybe in the future that is something that can be added. However, for now, you can just create your own custom implementation to make a page transition occur. And to do that, we will create a new splash screen. And in the screens folder, I'm just going to paste the splash.dart file. And for this, we will need to also have the routes to the other parts of our application, which I will discuss in a moment. So let's quickly explore what is happening. In the splash screen, the first thing that we will do is we will get access to the current user. So this user object will basically tell us whether we are signed in, signed out, or if the package is still initializing. And to get access to this user, there are two ways that we can do it. We can either say final user and then context.get sign in user. So this will just synchronously get the sign in user, or we can watch for the sign in user and watch and listen for changes. So the reason that I'm using watch in this instance is because when the app loads, it will initially be with a state of initializing. And then after the state is determined, we will either be authenticated or not authenticated. And we get access to this by calling .map on the user. So this is from the freeze package. So it's just a very simple way to get all of the different potential states for this user object. So just as an example, let's actually just print initializing to see if this ever occurs. And let's do a hot restart. And yeah, I forgot in our main.dart, we just need to import the splash screen now. Okay, so we actually didn't get that initializing, but I believe on Flutter Web we will actually see that because it takes a little bit longer for the package to initialize. But if it is initializing, then what will happen is we will just go to the bottom, and regardless of this, we will return a scaffold and a circular progress indicator to basically indicate that the package is loading or the app is loading. And if this doesn't occur, that would be because we are either authenticated, so we're going to call this method navigate to home screen, or we are not authenticated, and then we will navigate to the off screen. So let me show you what I mean by that. In the navigate to off screen, we are calling the navigator.off context, and then we are pushing a replacement screen. So this screen or the splash screen will be replaced by the off screen. And on the off screen, I just added this static method to basically just easily get the root. So we'll get the material page root and just return the off screen. And the same in the home screen, we also have a root static getter, but this time we're returning the home screen. And the reason we're using the widget binding instance.add post frame callback is because we only want the navigation to occur after the first time that the build is called. So we want this build method to be called at least once. Otherwise, we will get errors by navigating to a screen before the build method has finished. So now the question is, how do we get to the new state? So if I'm gonna authenticate with this account, then we'll get a pop-up over here that says we are signed in, but we aren't transitioning to a new page. And that is because we are no longer in the splash screen. We have replaced that splash screen with a new root. So currently we're showing the off screen. So this user that's listening over here, this watch sign user, this is no longer listening for changes. But what we can do is in our off screen, where we actually create our lit off custom, we can provide methods that will be called when authentication is successful or when authentication fails. So what we want is when the auth is successful, and then we will use this callback to make a new navigation. So navigator.auth, and then on the context we will say push replacements, and the root we will get from the home screen. So let's just import this, and there we go. So now I did a restart. We went to the home page because the splash screen got rebuilt, and in this instance, because we were authenticated, we navigated to the home screen. So if we press sign out, nothing's going to happen, because again in the sign out now, so if we go back to the home page, now we will need to also navigate back to the off screen, because we are no longer using the lit off state. So before this, we used the lit off state, and this will automatically switch between the authenticated screen and the unauthenticated screen. But now we need to manage that navigation ourselves. So in the home, we will just make sure that we push to the off screen again. So if we're going to say restart, then we will go back to the home screen, because we restarted the application, and that resulted in the splash screen being called again. However, this time, because we're doing navigation, or we added those navigation handlers, if I sign in, then everything should be fine and dandy. So let's sign in, and there we go. Now we get a page transition to the home screen, and the same thing, if we press sign out, we get a page transition to the off to the off screen. And then finally, the very last thing that we will do is in the off screen, we are gonna just change the notification messages that we get. So you would have seen that throughout the video, we get the error messages and the success error messages. But in the lit off widget, we can provide a error notification override and a success notification. So what we can do here is we can provide this notification config, and there are a number of different attributes that you can change to make a unique notification pop-up. As an example, all I'm gonna do in this application is just change the color a little bit. So let's do an example. I'm gonna say test and enter a wrong password. And now the color has changed and we get a different icon over here and a different color. And same thing if we sign in successfully, we will get a nice pop-up that matches our theme. And that's that for the code. A very long video, and if you've stayed until the end, I really appreciate that. Remember to check out Sara's video to see how you can implement the third-party auth sign-in. So he'll show you how to do Google, Apple, and Twitter. And what's cool about that is it works on iOS, Android, and web with basically no changes on your side. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.